for our inaugural Zoom Munch and Learn, we have Celeste Scott, who went to Middle Tennessee State University, where she earned a degree in plant and soil science in 2007. She is currently pursuing a master's in agriculture and natural resources management at the University of Tennessee, Martin. She is also currently a horticulture agent with the University of Tennessee, serving Madison County. And Celeste promotes horticulture education and best management practices for growing ornamentals and vegetables in the community and in her surrounding areas. And Celeste also serves as the coordinator for the Madison County Master Gardeners Program. But what Celeste really wants you to know about her is that she was raised on a production beef, cattle, and row crop farm in Gibson County. And you might hear my dog back there. And in addition to her love of plants, she also has a passion for music and horses. She plays 2 instruments, loves to sing, and she participated in marching band in high school and in college. She's been married for 9 years and has 2 kids, Lane, who is 5, and Ellie Raylan, who is 2. So let's turn things over to Celeste Scott.
Yay! I'm so glad to be here with y'all today, and thank you, Lindley, for that introduction. I feel like you all just know my whole story now, where I've been and what I've been doing all these past years, but I'm so happy to be with Extension now. When I got out of college, I did a little stint there where I worked for Tennessee Farmers Co-op for about 7 years, and that was a wonderful experience. But I was, again, in the realm of production agriculture and wasn't where my passion is, which is horticulture. So I was super, super excited when I had an opportunity to apply for a job with UT Extension, and so grateful for the opportunity to work with them. And I'm loving what I do there, and the people that I get to work with, and the volunteers that I get to work with there as well. So I'm happy to be here with you all today. I'm excited that I'm your first test run on Zoom meeting having, and I promise you it'll be fun. And if you have questions, like Lindley said, just pop them there in the chat box, and then at the end we can feel free to unmute yourselves, and it's a manageable size group, so I think we can just have some casual conversations there at the end. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. All right, so I think you should be seeing, can you see my screen and it looks like a slideshow?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, do you want these little videos here on the side, or do you want that to be hidden, Lindley? Can you see? There's videos, there's no video.
I only see your title screen.
Okay, good. So I will leave them over here. I just didn't want it to mess up your view if I left everybody's little video icons on my second screen here, just making sure that wasn't in your way. So today we are going to talk about water stewardship in the urban landscape. And this is a beautiful picture that we have here on the title screen on the left. And you may be thinking, oh, there's no way I can have that. I don't live at a lake, or I don't live near a pond. However, believe it or not, this picture is taken at a homeowners association subdivision where they have a stormwater retention pond. So this isn't even a recreational fishing area. It's just a place where water, that stormwater runoff is held to help mitigate runoff issues. So there are many things that we can do to beautify these areas, help preserve them, and protect our water quality at the same time. So we're gonna touch on, I'm gonna do a little intro about, why stewardship is so important. Then we are going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're faced with as homeowners in urban areas. And then we're gonna talk about some solutions, some things that we can actually do, which is always one of my favorite parts. So this picture that we're looking at here, you may be wondering, well, what are we looking at exactly here? Well, this is an aerial image that shows the aggregate impact of soil erosion and soil loss over a large watershed area. Now, this is not in America, this is in South America, but I just thought it was a good example showing you how all of the small things that we as homeowners are doing at our community levels can be compounded when you have millions of homeowners who, you know, are doing things that could cause erosion or sediment to get into our waterways. Let's think about, where does that water go? You know, maybe it just goes into a ditch at your house, but all the water that leaves your property that does not infiltrate into the soil eventually makes its way where? To an ocean. And so let's think about all those small actions and how they can aggregate and form a larger problem in the end. So that was just kind of an example of trying to convince you that things that we can do on our own actually can make a difference. And maybe one person doing it really isn't going to have an impact, but if we've got to start somewhere, right? So let's take a personal responsibility and action for that, and really own that stewardship practice. This picture here, I just thought this was would be a neat thing to add in. This is called eutrophication. This is where high levels of nutrients in the water trigger excessive plant growth of algae and other aquatic plants. And when those plants begin to decompose, they actually they use the dissolved oxygen that's in the water, and then you end up with fish kill because there's not enough available oxygen for those fish. So if you ever hear about some of those algae blooms along the coast, and this actually is in the Gulf of Mexico, an aerial view of one of those eutrophication blooms, just kind of wanted you to be aware of that. And these high levels of nutrients, this could be contributed to fertility. So whether that comes from agricultural practices or things that we are applying to our yards or things that we are inappropriately applying. When you spread fertilizer and it lands on the sidewalk, guess what happens when it rains? It washes straight into the street drain. And where does all water that leaves your property go? To the ocean. So this is just a quick example. I wanted to kind of tie that back and make sure it was hitting home about why we're even talking about this today. So again, you may be thinking, what is stewardship? And to me, the term stewardship can be has several different definitions, but I like a definition that we use with the Tennessee Extension Master Gardener program. Stewardship to us, it describes intentional decisions and practices for the use of environmental resources that meet the needs of the present while preserving the ability to meet the needs of the future. So this concept could also by many be described as sustainability. You know, I feel like everywhere we go, we're always hearing that word. Well, is this sustainable? I want a sustainable practice, which is excellent, but we don't want to get caught up in the vocabulary. We prefer the personal responsibility that is implied by using the term stewardship, right? So sustainability, that doesn't have any kind of personal connection or call to action. But if I say stewardship, we can't have stewardship without someone taking that personal action and doing some of these things to preserve our natural resources. So the next thing I wanted to show y'all, this is pretty interesting, but I'm not sure if you knew, but 3 out of every 4 Tennesseans now live in more concentrated, what we would call urbanized areas. So maybe they don't live right in metro, you know, but they're in urban sprawl. We have 3 out of every 4 Tennesseans living in an urban sprawl area. And residential landscape stewardship is more important now than it has ever been. And I'm going to show you some visual reasons why coming up in the next few slides. Before we get there, I want to talk a little bit real quickly about what is a watershed. So I want you to be aware that every place on earth is inside a watershed. Okay, all water goes somewhere, remember? So everything is in a watershed. Water movement inside a watershed is determined by the contours of the land. And these contours create a watershed. And these watersheds are areas that drain into specific bodies of water, okay? So you can see in this picture, we have a ridge line here on the right. We've got a ridge line on the left. So according to gravity, any water that falls is going to roll down those slopes and collect here in this valley. Now, maybe to make its way down those mountains, it first had to find a ditch or another more insignificant valley to travel and flow down. Let me get my pointer out so you can see what I'm talking about. Pointer, laser pointer. So here's our ridge line. That water may, if it falls here, it first has to go down to this ridge, and follow that ridge all the way down into this ultimate valley. So we've got several different waterways that this water has to go to before it finally makes its way to this creek or smaller river. And I want you to be aware that watersheds are nested within one another. So we have smaller watersheds that are all nested inside larger ones. So let's be very specific. So here at my house, I want to show you. I think you can see out the window, there's the road. I've got a ditch right there. That ditch is dry for the majority of time, so it will be called an ephemeral waterway. It only carries water periodically when we have a large rain, but it's still a waterway. So from here on my property, water goes into that ditch. From that ditch, it flows to a smaller creek. That creek is called Turkey Creek. From that creek, the water flows into a small river, which is called the Forkadere River. Then the Forkadere River flows into a larger river, which is the Mississippi. And where does the Mississippi go? To the ocean. So every time we make that transition to another waterway, that's another nested watershed. So just wanted you to have a good idea about what watersheds are so that we can have a better understanding of how water moves and why it's important for us to be aware of what's happening on our own property, okay? I like this slide because oftentimes we don't realize how dirty things really are, especially in urban settings, until it snows, right? The snow is beautiful, and then all of a sudden, a few days later, it begins to melt, and it starts showing its true colors, if you will. All this dirt and grime and pollutants that are coming from cars and vehicles, sediment that is being washed down that streetway as the snow melts and carried with the water to the drains. This is a real tell, I feel like, it shows its true colors, if you will. So we're going to talk about a few different circumstances that impact the quality of our water by introducing foreign matter to those aquatic habitats. And so after we cover these issues, we're going to touch on stormwater, how they affect erosion, flooding, and pollutants. And then we're going to talk about some solutions, some things that we can do. So here we know the focus, this is a picture of a rural landscape. This could be anywhere in Tennessee, but this particular picture was taken in Middle Tennessee about 10 years ago. So as you can imagine, this landscape has changed over time. This was a farm. They had a home place and a farm shop and a graveled lot, but for the most part, this was open area, had fields, pastures, and wooded areas. And this is what that landscape looks like now. So now we see homes and rooftops and driveways, roads, and a little bit of bare ground, actually, ground that doesn't have any cover on it. So the imperviousness, those impervious surfaces, here have risen from like 3% in the previous picture to over 30% impervious surface. And this could be compared to many of our circumstances in urban areas, especially in the Shelby County area where we've got urban sprawl happening all around us. So I want to give you an example of how this can impact runoff and why it's important. A 1-inch rain on a 1 acre of parking lot produces 16 more times runoff volume than the same rain on a field or a wooded area. 16 more times. Think about all that extra water that our waterways are having to handle now. And if you can imagine, with increased volume, you have increased speed. When you have water, large volumes of water picking up speed, you can see how we could have a real issue with sediment and erosion, and that sediment polluting our waterways. Another good example, this is from the Environmental Protection Agency. This kind of brings it home for an urban area. A city block, one typical city block, can generate more than 5 times more runoff than a wooded area of the same exact size. So I just kind of, I feel like those parallels can help us understand why it's so important for us to be aware of our surroundings and try to do some conservation. Stream miles impaired, as you can imagine, you can see the graph here. Over the years, our miles of stream are are being degraded, you know, as time goes along. So there is a sign here that we need to be taking action and being good stewards of our land. Now this slide, just real quickly, there's lots of words and lines on here, but don't worry about that. What I want you to look at is the solid line. And let me turn my pointer on again. It'll be clear. It'll make more sense for me to do it like that. Laser pointer. So if you can see this solid line right here, it's low, then it comes up to a gentle slope and then goes back down. This is an example of what happens in an undeveloped area when we have a rain flow. This base flow is how much water is usually in a creek or a waterway. When it rains, so we're right here at our base flow, it rains and it comes up just a little bit, a nice slope there, then gradually decreases, okay? And that was for a large storm. In a developed area, we have a lower base flow, and when we have those large rain events, look what happens. It jumps way up. It peaks way, way up here because we're having those higher volumes and faster flows. And then it goes down really quickly. And then you can see here with a small storm, the same thing happens. Instead of those nice rounded bell-shaped curves, which are always good, we are having these alarming spikes, and this can have some detrimental effects to our waterways. How do I get off this thing here? There we go. And when basically that screen that we were just looking at describes to us a syndrome, it's called urban stream syndrome. This is what happens. You get a heavy rain, all the water floods into these creeks from or channel, you know, human-made channels from all those impervious surfaces, and we end up having erosion on our banks. You can see how muddy this water is. Also, the water that's being carried into these channels has a warmer temperature, because if it's falling on pavement or asphalt or rooftops, you can imagine how much warmer those temperatures of that water are going to be. And even 1 or 2 degrees can have an effect on the aquatic life that lives in these waterways. So all of these things together can have some impacts, and I'm just trying to point them out to you. We won't cover all these topics here. We won't have time for that. Okay, so something that you may be a little more, I think I missed one. No, I didn't. So something that you may be seeing quite often on your property in a residential area. I see this all the time. This is in a residential area. They've got a large slope, and the water is not going where they want it to. You can tell that they have put in a dry creek that was meant to carry the water, but it wasn't formed properly, and now we have erosion. We can't get any vegetation to grow in this area, which is only magnifying the problems. Here's another thing that I see quite often. Even if it's not a creek that always has water, this could be one of those ephemeral waterways that doesn't have water except for when we have large rain events. And I see this sharp bank drop off with erosion, and it's hard to establish any vegetation to grow on those steep waterways. So that can always be an issue. We're going to talk about how to address these after we talk about these issues here. And then I want to talk a little bit about pollutants in waterways. So we can have point source pollutants. Those are specific known entities like an industry, a water treatment plant. But believe it or not, most of those have been well regulated through our Clean Water Acts in recent years. So what we're faced with now is identifying non-point source pollutants. And those are sources that are not well defined. They could originate throughout our communities, our neighborhoods. Some examples of that would be, you know, the aggregation that we discussed at the very beginning, where we had that picture of the sediment coming out of the mouth of that river. So some things that could contribute to this would be the misapplied fertilizers, fluids leaking from vehicles, bacteria from garbage. That's something that I had never thought about until I started becoming interested in water management. And little side note, 90% of our waterway pollutants in Tennessee are from non-point sources. That means we can't identify one specific area. Guess what that means? It's mostly aggregated homeowner activities, okay? Because farming would be considered a point source. And if 90% of our pollutants are from non-point source, we can rule that out. So let's talk about stream impairment. Streams could be impaired with sediment, like as we've discussed. Pathogens, we talked about that a little bit. Here's a picture of a dumpster that's, leaking out. Who knows what? That could contain E. coli if this has leftovers from a restaurant where they've done meat trimmings or something similar to that. This could contain all kinds of bacteria and harmful pathogens that could get into that waterway, not only affect the aquatic life that are living in that waterway, but eventually could affect us if that water percolates down into groundwater. Habitat alteration, that'd be through like channelization, where we come through because we need a road right here and we don't want that creek running there anymore, and we move that channel or we straighten that channel and take out the curves. That's called channelization. When we do that, that speeds up the flow of water because you're not making it snake along. And then again, that is a side effect of that is increased sediment erosion, just polluting the waters even more. Nutrients, excess nutrients, we talked about things that we may do at home to mitigate that. Making sure that we are not over applying fertilizers, don't allow fertilizers to stay on impervious surfaces like driveways, sidewalks, etc. And then finally toxins, so that'd be like chemicals. We need to, there are some best management practices that we need to follow to make sure we are storing and using our pesticides properly. The last slide I'm going to talk about with issues before we get into solutions is residential water use. And this is mostly kind of just a cool slide. I thought you would like to know this. So we're going to do a little math. There are 400 gallons per day of water that are used in a typical suburban household. 30% of that water is used outside. 50% of that is used on their lawn and gardens. 50% of that is wasted due to overwatering. Say you've got your irrigation set on a timer. That's not a good idea. Evaporation, runoff. This picture, who waters their sidewalk? Don't put a sprinkler emitter right beside a sidewalk. That doesn't need water. So when we do the math, 7.5% of a household's water is being wasted, essentially. And I'm going to do that again in gallons. So 30% of 400 gallons, that's 120. 120 gallons are used outside. 50% of that is used for the lawn or garden. That's 60 gallons. If 50% of 60 gallons is wasted, that's 30 gallons. We're wasting 30 gallons of water. That's a lot. I mean, you could take how many baths could you take with 30 gallons of water? How many times could you flush your toilet? So it helps for us to be conscious about our water use. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Because I'm running out of time. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to finish up solutions because I don't want to keep you all too long. So next, we are going to talk about, oh, it went forward and I didn't mean it to. Here we go. So we're going to talk about what have people been doing with water on their properties. Obviously, the conventional way has been to move it off their property as soon as possible and let it take along whatever has to go with it. And then where does that end up? That ends up obviously in our streams, and you can see all the trash and everything that can get all caught up with that. So now we're going to talk about some solutions for our landscape. So one maybe not so obvious solution would be to enlist the use of buffers for landscaping, wildlife, and it can even improve our water quality. To maintain a buffer, basically we're designating a no-mow area. We could choose natural or native plants, and of course maximizing diversity always helps to benefit our wildlife by providing lots of different food sources and what am I trying to say? Habitat. So in this picture here, you can see this is their lawn. They keep it nice and mowed. I know you can't see it, but there's a creek right over here on the other side of that tree line. And I realize this picture is not a residential urban area, but I didn't have one. So this is the one I used. And they are maintaining a no-mow buffer here. They haven't planted anything in particular. They haven't come through here and seeded natives or anything like that. They've done the bare minimum to help protect their waterway by leaving this no-mow buffer. So when we get heavy rains, instead of mowing right up to the edge of those trees and letting that water flow rapidly down into the gully, creating erosion, they have all this vegetation that is helping to slow that flow of water. So this is completely possible on a smaller home level, and I'm going to show you a picture of how you could do that. Before we get there, this is just a side note. If you have a large property, the more buffer, the better. The wider your buffer can be, the more benefit you're going to get from it. If you only have room to do a small 10-foot buffer, that's okay. You're going to get some bank stabilization benefits from that. If you have room for a 30-foot buffer, you're going to get some bank stabilization and water quality improvements, so on and so forth. You can see the next level here is flood control, and then finally wildlife habitat with that maximum distance. Here are some ideas for plant materials for buffers. I do have a list that we can share with everybody who attends the talk. I've got several publications that I can send to Lindley that kind of go along with this discussion. But this is your opportunity to include some really unique shrubs and grasses, maybe that you don't already have on your property. These that I have listed here are all native. The picture here is spice bush. Who knew spice bush had such an amazing fall color? Not to mention, it's the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail. So you would be getting double benefits in that area. So here's an example of how we could implement this buffer area in a more residential type area. Now imagine that this is not a stream. Imagine that this, I mean, it could be a stream, but for most people, we don't live right on a stream that always has water. Imagine this is an ephemeral ditch, right? Kind of like what I have here on my property. And we want to allow a view. If it is a nice stream, you want to still be able to see it, right? So one of the keys to this is to allow you that visual window. So you wouldn't plant the larger shrubs right here. Here we've got a line of larger shrubs. In this gray area, we've got smaller herbaceous plants like grass, things that are really going to hold this bank very well. And we don't mow anything. This is our no-mow zone right here. From this shrub line on is no mow. However, we can mow ourselves a path to the water. Say that you need a canoe path, or you need a path to get down so you can go fishing, or get down there and go swimming, or do whatever you want to do in that water area. You can, you know, it would be feasible for you to allow a mown path to allow you to access that water. This is a picture of it like right at planting. And this was actually formulated for a half-acre residential property. So you're looking at this thinking, oh, I still don't have room. This is half an acre. Okay, now this is 5 years after we've allowed that shrub line to grow and some of those grasses and herbaceous plants to grow up. And I wish I had a real life picture, but isn't that beautiful? Here's a few real life pictures. Here's a mowed path. They're leaving all this area a no-mow zone because they wanted to get real natural, and they are keeping one path mown that leads them straight to the water. When they get down to the water, you can see they've used a number of various things to help control the erosion and sediment. You could use concrete riprap. That is, you know, an allowable practice to help with stabilization, and also to allow you some time to get vegetation to grow. You could, you know, you could do some bank stabilization plantings in and amongst this concrete riprap and allow that to hold the soil while those plants take root. Here's another example where they've used native grasses and sedges and even some water-loving plants to kind of fill up those banks and cover up any bare ground. I just thought this picture was pretty. One of my friends from East Tennessee sent it. This is a native plant called turtlehead, and this little orange plant is called jewelweed. And we can grow, I have jewelweed here in my garden, but sometimes you'll find it like in mucky ditches and stuff like that. So if you can get your hands on some jewelweed, that'd be a great plant to add to some of those areas that hold water occasionally. So this is something I see a lot. This is a park setting, and I've seen it in residential areas as well, where we mow right up to the edge of wherever that ditch is. And all we're doing is compounding the problem. You see we have a steep drop off. So if we created a no-mow zone here, eventually this slope would even itself out, and we would have a more friendly slope, if you will, where water wasn't just jutting over the edge and eating away at the underside of, or the toe of that stream bank there. So this would be a poorly maintained area. I was just showing examples. This one's a little better. You can see on the left, I think that's English ivy, so I wouldn't agree with their plant choice because that can naturalize and, you know, get loose out in our natural areas. But it is doing some good things for this water stream here. It is covering that bare area. And you can see how that slope has been laid over. Now here it's not quite as good. Maybe they haven't done stream bank restoration on that side yet. You can tell it's still very steep and has very little vegetation growing on it. And then this is another urban setting example. There are lots of grants and programs out there to help with stream bank restoration. And isn't this ugly, this one on the left? Oh my goodness. And look what they have turned it into only 5 years later. This is a before and after. Okay, the trees are already there. This was just in the winter when they weren't doing their thing. But they have planted and come through there and done some restorative practices there, and that's beautiful. So it's not only contributing to the people that live in that area just to have something aesthetically pleasing, but it's improving the quality of their water and the animals that live there. We're going to skip over that. We don't have time to talk about the specifics of stream bank stabilization. Maybe we can make that a whole nother talk in itself. But here's some other things, simple things that we can do on a homeowner level that aren't, you know, we don't have lots of area. Downspouts. This is what I see a lot. A downspout that goes directly into the ground. And where does that come out usually? In a little culvert. And then it goes, this area should be pointing in there. It's pointing the wrong way. And then from that little culvert, it goes straight into here. That carries it to a municipal water system, wastewater system, stormwater system, I guess would be a better word for that. And then straight into a stream or a creek. Here I see this a lot as well, where we have these concrete conduits that help you rapidly carry water as quick as you can off of your property. And that is something we want to get away from. We want water to have time to infiltrate in place. If that water can infiltrate through the soil has wonderful capabilities of being able to filter out lots and lots of pollutants, including, you know, toxins, pesticides, soaps, oils. And if we can just allow that water to slow down before it gets to those waterways, you know, that's what we're aiming for. That could be a small step that we personally take as stewards of the landscape. We could do this by using a splash pad. You could make, you know, rocked channels that come down from your downspouts and help direct water where you'd like it to go. They also have these really neat, they call them downspout gutters. So if you didn't want the water pooling here, you could run this gutter out to your lawn or your turf to where you want that to actually go. Another thing I didn't have a picture of, that you can connect black corrugated pipe to the end of your downspout that has perforations in it, and actually bury that underneath mulch, like in your landscape. And so as water comes through that pipe, it is allowed to go out those perforated holes and help you irrigate your landscape, the plants that are right there in the immediate area of that downspout. So that would be another good option. Some other things, a little more expensive, pervious surfaces. We can now have surfaces that look impervious that actually are pervious, if that makes sense. So when you hear the term pervious paver, the paver itself is not pervious, or the water is not filtering through the actual paver. However, the joints where those pavers are hooked together are open and the joint itself is permeable. So it allows water to go through those joints, and then it goes through all these different layers of filters, essentially different size rock filters, until it finally gets down here to an under drain that then carries the water, you know, to like groundwater, places where it can access and infiltrate to be groundwater, if that makes sense. There are also some impervious sidewalks and concretes that I've seen. So there's lots of options out there. Even a stabilized turf. This is pretty cool. It's like, think of if you had brick pavers that were placed very far away from each other, but then grew turf in between them. So it's hard, but it's also living. So that's another possibility. And mulch. This one is so simple. Mulch holds soil. If you aren't able to have vegetative cover all the time, let's at least cover that soil up with mulch. That's going to slow water and it's going to hold soil. We can also use dry creek beds. You can tell that this landscape is a slope. Right down here, there's a small creek. So they are directing what we call sheet flow, or rain that hits their lawn, to access this dry creek at this certain area. They've sloped it down. It's hard to tell from this picture, but all the water is directed to this area, and see how they've curved it to help slow the water as it goes down that incline and empties into that waterway. So several things we can do. Also, green spaces are great. This allows for infiltration. The more grass we have, you know, the better. We want it to be green and vegetative, have roots, and be able to drain. And this is would be considered like a retention basin. So you can tell how it is concave. Water could collect in this area and it'll hold it here until it infiltrates. Also, using a grass-lined swales could be helpful. You can see that this is one of those quote unquote ephemeral ditches that only occasionally carries water. So instead of using Roundup to keep this clean and clear and lining it with riprap, let's just let it be grass and mow that soft swell right there. And then infiltration and other catchment areas. This picture is a photo that I took at a park in an urban area. So you can see where the water from the impervious surfaces is being collected here and being held until that water can be infiltrated. Another easy thing we can do is use rain barrels. So neat little fact, a half inch rain event, say it rains half an inch tonight, on a typical roof of a house, which is I'm just going to say is about 1,000 square feet, can generate over 300 gallons of water, okay? A half inch rain. This could fill like over 5-gallon buckets, obviously, but realistically, most people only have one rain barrel if they're going to have a rain barrel, but that's okay. So 1/4 of the same roof, you know, because you've got to divide it out. If you've got 4 downspouts, you're only going to get 1/4 of that rain that's going to come into one downspout for your one rain barrel. So one downspout could generate about 70 gallons every time it rains a half an inch. So if you have a 55-gallon bucket, you're getting pretty close to being able to collect everything that is going to be directed towards that one rain barrel during that half-inch rain event. The challenge that we're faced here is to use that caught water before the next time that it rains. So it's all good and great to catch it, but we need to use it so that we can catch more water and slow the movement of water off of our property by keeping that water in place and using it. We could use that to irrigate plants. We could use it to wash our cars. And we could just, you know, open up you can actually connect a hose to the bottom of it and take it out into the lawn and just empty it into a lawn area if you don't have plants that need to be watered. And then it's having an opportunity to recharge your groundwater. So that's wonderful. Another really fun one that we could do like a whole workshop about is rain gardens. I love rain gardens. I know we don't have time to go into it, but the point of a rain garden is to collect water and hold it for a very short period of time, less than 48 hours, and allow that water to infiltrate and recharge groundwater. So we're directing it from our downspouts, from that sheet flow from our lawns into a rain garden, and we are purposefully catching that water. Here's an example of a rain garden that we have at the West Tennessee Research and Education Center in Jackson. And this is a picture of it actually holding water. We misjudged the depth of our rain garden, and we should have planted these Rudbeckia up here in the dry zone. There are different zones to a rain garden. It gets deeper as you approach the middle. So we ended up having to dig those up, but you never know until you get started with the rain garden, but they're really fun. And then obviously best management practices when we are handling pesticides. So we want to be careful that we're not making spills. We want to put backflow prevention siphons on our hydrants to prevent, chemicals from coming back into your water source. Make sure your equipment is calibrated properly before you go applying pesticides and fertilizers. We want to limit off-target drift so it doesn't get into waterways, and then storing them appropriately so that we don't have accidents during the off-season. And disposal. Let's make sure we get rid of those. Even if there's no product left in it, we need to dispose of those containers properly. So let's wait for a hazardous waste disposal collection day. I know most communities have those. So as a summary, we talked about several challenges that stormwater in urban areas can present to residents: flooding, erosion, pollutants, and then some solutions that we as homeowners can easily do ourselves. And I know I went over time, I'm so sorry, but I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I will entertain any questions.
Celeste, there's one, and it says, I'm not sure how this applies to my yard, which I know is a yard that is in the middle of Memphis, just outside of Midtown. So do you have any suggestions? Maybe the barrel you were talking about and collecting rainwater from your roof?
Yes.
As maybe being a solution for that?
Definitely. So there's all kinds of things. Disconnecting her downspouts, ensuring she has those green open spaces to allow for infiltration of water. I know when you get into some of those really urbanized areas, you have lots of, I don't want to say unnecessary impervious surfaces, but, patios, parking areas, driveways, all these different things. So we may want to think about ways that we could make those surfaces more pervious by maybe implementing some of those pervious pavers or something similar to that. Again, using mulch, using rain barrels, installing a rain garden. Now, a rain garden, a properly designed rain garden doesn't look like anything different from just a landscaped area, right? We can mix colors, we can have extended bloom periods, they're perennial, we've got a mix of herbaceous and woody plants. So if that's done properly, you can have a nice ornamental landscaped area that's also providing the advantage of water collection and holding water on site. That's our main goal in an urban area, is to help water infiltrate. Because you remember how we talked at the beginning about how much impervious surface there was and how we have all of this increased runoff in urban areas. And so our main goal is to keep water on site. So I think some easy things that we can do would be to disconnect downspouts, make sure we do mulch, do some rain barrels if that was something that you would be interested in getting into. But just the easiest practices that nearly everyone can do is disconnect downspouts, use mulch, and make sure we have vegetative cover and don't have bare ground. Does that make sense?
It does to me, thank you. And I'm one of those people with a little Midtown Memphis yard, so it has bad drainage. And I know I need to redirect it now and slow it down in some places. Another question is, will I be able to watch this later? And we did record this, and so hopefully we can post this on our website. And someone else says that they would love for us to do a class on rain gardens. So,
They're so fun.
so Celeste, maybe we'll have to schedule that.
And you know, that's a good idea. And just so that you know, there are several different like parts of rain garden. So we could do one on rain garden construction and then a whole nother one that just focuses on design and plants, because it's too much to cover in one class. Wanted to.
Well, is there anyone else who has any questions? I am going to unmute everyone. It's time for us to start wrapping up. We can have last questions, or we can just all say thank you.